Missions Pulse. Know God's heart, join his mission.
How do you see this missionary mobilization shifting, or the shift in missions? What was once the mission field is now the mission force, is what they have always said. You're seeing non-Western or global South people sowing into ministries that are from different countries outside their own country. What does the face of missions look like these days as we see this shift in global missions?
So I'll probably step on some toes here.
Let's do it.
Not trying to intentionally.
Okay, let's pause right there. I'm gonna pause it right here. I'm gonna make some cool lead up of some nice music, and it'll lead up, and then it'll climax as soon as you start talking. Go.
I can always count on you. So when I look at the pandemic, I look at it in light, and I think it was something my pastor said as it related to churches, that churches aren't going to be the same when this is over. And probably in some ways we shouldn't be. I mean, although I think what's happening is a lot of churches, we're just trying to force our way back to where it was pre-pandemic. Let's just get back to normal. We're tired of all this. Let's just go back. I don't know that that's really the way forward. And I think the same is in missions. There's always a lot of talk about mobilizing nationals or the global South. I've done a lot of it. But the reality is, pre-pandemic, I would say from a national standpoint, I don't know that we were really that as intentional as our words were, or our words claimed we were. I think there was still a strong emphasis on getting outsiders in. And there's nothing wrong with outsiders going in. Don't hear me wrong, because I do believe God calls outsiders to go in. But I think this pandemic has shown me that we've got to do more and be more intentional with mobilizing and working with nationals. And not just working with them, but elevating them to leadership. Or if you want to say it in other words, submitting to their leadership.
Yeah.
And because as we saw in places like China and India and Pakistan, Nepal, I mean, you could name any country on that side of the world, the number of foreign missionaries that had to leave or couldn't get back in is numerous. I mean, just in China alone, there are hundreds that are not going back.
Yeah.
And the percentage that are gone versus what was there 3 years ago is huge.
Massive.
We're not talking 20, 30%. I've heard 70 to 80% or higher.
And they all land here in Chiang Mai, Thailand as a kind of staging point.
You should know.
Yeah, I saw a huge influx of people who just got booted from China, or the door slowly closed, as it is probably more aptly painted. A digital cultural revolution of sorts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the first stop is here. And now they're gone. So, okay, no more Western missionaries. What does that mean? Missions is over?
Yeah. So one of the things I was talking with a friend in China, and he was telling me that there were all these teams in a certain part of the country that had nationals a part of their team. When the foreigners had to leave or were locked out or forced to leave, a lot of his national friends felt lost. And the reason was the foreigner was always in charge. Everything was dependent on the foreigner. And so it stalled a lot of ministries in that area. And honestly, I think in a large area of China, just all over. And I think that was true in a lot of places. So much for so many years have been dependent on the outsiders, especially Westerners, that when things like this happen, it puts a lot of stress on the nationals to pick up where we are forced to leave off, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
and
because
then
we haven't been poising people or preparing them or equipping them to take over. I mean, you've seen the age-old missionary who spends, first few years and then 10, then 20, and 50 years later is still the pastor of the small church, where in fact, in my opinion, man, let's move back to that Pauline kind of style where you move in, raise up local leadership, move out, and write them letters.
Correct. I mean, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that nobody prepares anyone. I can find examples probably just as much as anyone watching, but I think more often than not, we're not preparing the nationals.
Yeah.
or we're treating them as people who must follow us and what we say and what we deem as the right methodology or whatever it is that we do. We're the ones in charge. And in a lot of respect, nationals in countries like Asia, they're kind of conditioned to look to us in that light. Okay? There has been a conditioning over the decades, but we need to change that. Yeah. And I think for me, the pandemic really highlighted that. And so we began looking at, positioning our people in positions of leadership. We've still got a ways to go. Some of it's just training issue that we're going to be working on. But we've been able to do that to some degree and put people from the region or within the national area where they're at to be in key positions of leadership. And because what we don't want to happen is when this happens again, because every doctor I talk to says it's not 100-year problem anymore, it's going to happen again. Or it could be like what's happened to China over the last 3 years, and India has been experiencing the same things, where foreigners are being forced out. But whether being forced out or a pandemic or whatever, we need to make sure that when the foreigner leaves, the hiccup that takes place in ministry is extremely minimal, and that the nationals are in a degree of position that they just carry it forward, regardless of whether we're present or not. That's the only way we're going to be able to reach these people. That's the only way we're going to get the gospel. That's the only way we've been able to get the gospel and this aid to the Afghans. We couldn't rely on foreigners right now. If we relied on Americans, it would not happen. In terms of going and doing. It only happened because a national was positioned perfectly for us, and they stepped up and took charge and led the way.
Missions Pulse. Know God's heart, join his mission. This podcast is powered by Within Reach Global. Subscribe, watch, and listen on YouTube today. Visit missionspulse.com.